But the point is that you want to get rid of launch on warning, because that's the only scenario in which your time windows for making decisions and so on are so compressed. And maybe you're contemplating going to war because of a cyber attack that's somehow gone wrong. You don't know. I mean, the fate of the world is at stake there.
That's the voice of Dr. Herbert Lin, Senior Research Scholar for Cyber Policy and Security at Stanford University. He's today's guest on Press the Button, a Plowshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security. And now, here are your co-hosts, Michelle Dover and Tom Kalina.
Welcome back to Press the Button. Tom, a lot has happened since the last time we were on the air.
As they say, Michelle, we live in interesting times, and we'll cover much of it in this week's episode. But first, we have something else we'd like to talk about.
By now, many of you have heard about the early passing of Tommy Raskin, son of Representative Jamie Raskin and his wife, Sarah Bloom Raskin. They wrote a beautiful tribute that you can find on Medium. Tommy was a part of our field and our family. Many of those who knew him personally have been sharing stories on social media about his kindness and deep generosity.
So on behalf of all of us here at Plowshares, we extend our profound condolences to the Raskin family. And please know that we are keeping your family firmly in our hearts. And to any of our listeners who are grappling with depression or other mental health issues, know that you are not alone. And we've posted some resources in the link to this episode that we hope you might find useful.
If there's one thing these past few years have taught us, it's that we belong to each other. So in Tommy's honor, please consider a moment this week to do something kind for someone else. Those little acts add up. Thank you.
And now back to today's episode. Michelle, what do you have lined up for early warning?
Today, we'll be talking about last week's attack on the U.S. Capitol and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's attempts to prevent President Trump from launching nuclear weapons in the final days of his term. And for those of you who haven't seen it, Tom wrote a piece for Politico with former Defense Secretary Bill Perry that addresses this very issue. We've included a link to the article in the episode notes.
Thanks, Michelle. And if I could just note that, we really do need to take a comprehensive approach to this. This is not an issue that we can leave to the military to decide in vague circumstances what is a legitimate launch or not. We really need to give the military better, more clear direction. And so this is an opportunity to establish how, as we as a nation, want our nuclear weapons to be used. Moving on, after early warning, I sit down with Herb Lin, an expert in cyber policy at Stanford University, and we talk about the SolarWinds cyber attack by Russia and its implications for controlling the most dangerous weapons on the planet. It's a great conversation, and I hope you get to hear it.
And finally, Tom answers a question about nuclear authority on this week's very timely Q&A segment. Remember, if you want your question answered on the air, tweet or DM us at PressButtonPod or send us an email at pressthebutton@plowshares.org. We love hearing from our listeners.
And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure just to tell one person about today's show. Every little bit helps. We really appreciate it.
With that, let's get into today's episode. The clock is ticking.
And now, early warning, early warning, early warning, early warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
Thanks, Dal. Today, I'm joined by Patrick Hiller, Executive Director of the War Prevention Initiative by the Jubitz Family Foundation, and Derek Johnson, Chief Executive Officer of Global Zero. Thank you both for joining.
Always happy to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
So, as you know, we have 7 minutes to cover the week's nuclear and national security news, starting now. Okay, Patrick, the only thing most of us are talking about right now, what exactly did we see in the attack on the U.S. Capitol last week?
Well, first of all, what we witnessed was not a protest. Those were acts of political violence, so that is violence to achieve political goals. And in this case, we're specifically looking at electoral violence because it was used to influence the outcome of the elections. And we can add domestic terrorism because civilians were targeted with violence for political purposes. It was also no surprise, Michelle. Before the election, we were among other organizations that came together raising concerns. We know from cases all over the world what causes electoral violence, such as an electoral process that is perceived unfair, an incumbent's fear of losing power, the use of threats to influence results, the spread of disinformation, and little or damaged institutional constraints. And I think you can confidently put a check mark behind each of these points. And then if we look at the Trump rally before the attacks, it was just a triggering event. And if we add root cause analysis of underlying conditions, these attacks did not come out of nowhere.
I've heard a lot of shock and disbelief, though, from friends here in the US and abroad about how this doesn't fit the picture of the America they know. And others, particularly those from communities of color, recognize this type of action quite well. So how does this insurrection fit into the broader history and context of American politics?
Well, I think we have to go big here. Otherwise, we're not getting into what we're trying to examine. So let me give you 4 quick, but in my view, very important points. First of all, violence as a norm. We can see it from all the way good guys with guns to keep us secure to, good guys with nuclear weapons to keep the world safe. That is all a flawed understanding of security, which relies on force and domination. Also, white supremacy. When we hear, this is not our America, this is our America, or we're taking our country back, which the extremists proclaimed in the Capitol, that is pure and simple white supremacy. And those proclamations connect them to a much broader base, which allows them to walk in and out of the Capitol almost unharmed. And just compare that to how Black Lives Matter protesters were treated. And white supremacy goes much deeper beyond the obvious. So we're looking domestically and internationally at what it means, who determines security, who has the authority to exercise power, who is seen as a threat, and what is considered, quote unquote, good violence. We saw patriarchy. You saw mostly aggressive men. You have to be strong and weakness is frowned upon. And we could talk for hours digging much deeper into that, but I also want to briefly mention exceptionalism. This is not who we are, is what we heard a lot in the last days, and that fails to recognize how flawed this country is and that it was built on patriarchy and white supremacy. So my experience as an American white man is completely different from that of many others, especially those from non-dominant groups. So when you hear this is not who we are, it's actually very exclusive in my view. And it is built on the idea of American exceptionalism. So America is fundamentally good and rational, and our interests are good for the world. That's what I hear with this is not who we are. So that's, I think, what we must grapple with before we start talking about coming together and healing.
Thanks, Patrick. Derek, Patrick already brought up the idea of good guys with nuclear weapons. And on Friday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about ways to prevent President Trump from using his sole authority to launch nuclear weapons in these final days of his term. So while she reportedly told congressional Democrats that General Milley assured her there are safeguards to prevent an illegal order of use, a spokesman for the general described the call as informational, providing answers regarding the process of nuclear command authority. Let's clarify. Are there safeguards that could prevent Donald Trump from launching nuclear weapons?
I know a lot of people, myself included, would love for the answer to that question to be yes. But the idea that there are safeguards in place is unfortunately just fantasy. The president's authority in this arena is absolute. So long as Donald Trump is the commander-in-chief, there are no legal, political, or operational constraints on his power to order a nuclear launch. The strike options that he has available to him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week have all been pre-screened for legality. So any order Trump gives is going to be presumed to be legal, and it's going to carry the full force of the presidency. In the chaos of the moment in which an order like that comes down, the pressure to obey is going to be overwhelming. Now, we don't know if General Milley gave the speaker the sort of standard boilerplate assurances that people always get when they poke around on this question, or if it was misreported, or if some new step has in fact been considered. But I can tell you that the U.S. nuclear apparatus is built for decisiveness. It's not designed to debate decisions. It is designed to preclude debate and execute decisions. And the only person who's doing the deciding is the president. There's no role for anybody, whether it's the VP, the defense secretary, or even the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to co-sign or second guess. They're not even in the chain of command. And people always try to tell me, this cannot be how it works. They really need to believe that someone else has to sign off on an order like this. And I don't blame them for that, because giving one person this kind of power sounds like an obviously terrible and dangerous idea, and it is. And they're also quick to point out that a president can't just push a button and up goes a nuke, which is true. But the unforgiving reality here is that the president sits atop a nuclear launch process that is designed expressly to execute his will. The so-called red button is just shorthand for a lightning fast process that starts with the president opening the nuclear briefcase and ends with cities reduced to radioactive rubble and millions of people dead. Now, there is one check in this 5-minute process, but that's just to verify the identity of the president. It's not about giving anybody. It's not about having anybody co-sign the order or agree that it's a good idea or even in the national security interest. It's just to make sure that the order is actually a real one coming from the commander in chief. So the president he picks up the phone, calls the National Military Command Center, tells them which pre-screened strike option that he has picked from that little black book of doom in the nuclear briefcase, and then they verify that it's him. The officer on the other end of the line reads a challenge code. The president reads a matching response on the little card that he carries with him everywhere. These are the so-called gold codes. And that's it. That's the safeguard. And that's what you have to do to get through it. If some new step beyond that has been introduced into this process, I don't know what that is, but I can tell you that it's extra constitutional, it's illegal, and it's subverting the nuclear chain of command, which in my view makes it totally unreliable and no comfort at all. It's not inconceivable that someone breaks from protocol or exercises a level of discretion that they're frankly not supposed to. We've seen that. That's happened before. We've seen this in history where someone down the food chain hits the brakes and prevents a world-ending mistake from being made. But we shouldn't be asked to rely on that. We shouldn't be told to worry. If shit goes sideways, maybe someone will buck all authority and prevent the nuclear system from doing exactly what it was intended to do.
Okay, so in light of this unforgiving reality, when President-elect Biden takes office on January 20th, what should he and the new Congress do to change the system?
Well, if we make it to January 20th, fingers crossed, reforming this system, reducing the risks that these weapons will be used, this has got to be a top priority for the next administration. And that means we need Joe Biden to do what presidents are typically loath to do, which is to put guardrails around his own authority and the authority of every president, Republican or Democrat, that comes after him. A lot of people are going to be breathing a big sigh of relief once Trump's out of office and he's been separated from the nuclear codes. And, I'm one of those people. But we cannot be satisfied with that. When you're talking about the authority to end all life on Earth as we know it, it is not enough to change who's in charge. You have got to change the system. And it's going to be up to all of us to make sure that Joe Biden future-proofs this problem. That means ending the president's sole authority to use these weapons and making sure that the most consequential decision on the planet is not just up to one person. And that also means committing the United States to never using nuclear weapons first in a conflict, which would preclude the kind of scenario that everybody's freaking out about right now. And lucky for us, there's a bill in Congress right now that would accomplish exactly that and give no first use the force of law, which is something that cannot be undone by a future president's executive order.
Derek, Patrick, thank you so much for joining.
Welcome to the show, everyone. As if 2020 did not give us enough to worry about, we now have the SolarWinds cyber attack by Russia. that seems to get worse by the day. So today we are talking about cyber attacks and their potential effects on nuclear weapons. And to help us navigate this complex subject, we have a very special guest. Dr. Herb Lin is Senior Research Scholar for Cyber Policy and Security at the Center for International Security and Cooperation. And he is the Hank J. Holland Fellow in Cyber Policy and Security at the Hoover Institution, both at Stanford. That is a mouthful. And in 2016, he served on President Obama's Commission on Enhancing National Cybersecurity. And before that, he was a professional staff member and staff scientist for the House Armed Services Committee, where his portfolio included defense policy and arms control issues. Herb, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Hi, glad to be here, and let's have a chat.
Excellent. So let's start with the big picture, with the SolarWinds hack. It is being described as the Pearl Harbor of American IT. Russia, U.S. intelligence tells us, used SolarWinds hacked programs to infiltrate at least 18,000 government and private networks. Among those who use SolarWinds software are the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the State Department, the Justice Department, the Homeland Security Department, and parts of the Pentagon, and the Department of Energy, including the National Nuclear Security Administration, which of course manages U.S. nuclear warheads. At a minimum, it has set off alarms about the vulnerability of government networks in the United States to attack and raise questions about how and why the nation's cyber defenses failed so spectacularly. Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, and the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee said, quote, "This is looking much, much worse than I feared. The size of it keeps expanding. It's clear the United States government missed it," unquote. So far, there are no public indications that the hackers reached into classified information. U.S. Stratcom Commander Admiral Charles Richards said this week that the nuclear command and control systems are, quote, "fully mission capable. We test them all the time. I've seen no indications of any compromise," unquote. But as President-elect Joe Biden said recently, quote, "There's still so much we don't know, including the full scale of the breach or the extent of the damage it has caused," unquote. So Herb, first the basics. Why was this SolarWinds hack so broad? Why were so many government agencies using this software? And essentially, what does this software do?
Well, the software, SolarWinds makes a product that they call Orion. And Orion is network management software. That is, it is something that you install on your own network to monitor network functions, to figure out who's talking to who, to see where bottlenecks are, and all that sort of stuff. And so all networks have some sort of network management program or capability built into them, so that system administrators can understand what's going on the networks. And so what apparently the Russians were able to do was to penetrate the Orion software in such a way that they gained access to, at least possible access to, many networks that this particular software controls. Once they have access that way, they're able to slip into these networks and do all kinds of interesting things in there. Now, at this point, there is no information that suggests that they've actually destroyed or changed any of the data that's resident on those networks. What we believe right now is that it was basically a big cyber spying operation that was intended to steal information that they shouldn't have access to. Now, there's, as you pointed out in your intro, there's no evidence right now yet that any classified information has been compromised. Maybe that's true. Maybe subsequent investigation will confirm or will point to that being true. But I think that the answer is we just don't know at this point.
I think you're right. So assuming that we're going to see more and bigger and more impactful cyber attacks going forward. Tell us what you're worried about in terms of cyber attacks and nuclear weapons. What effects might there be of a cyber attack on nuclear weapons and operations, and what worries you the most?
Well, okay, so when you look across the entire nuclear enterprise of the United States, I mean, this is a big and complicated thing. So it includes the warheads themselves, the delivery systems, the bombers and the missiles and the submarines and so on. It includes the command and control systems, the nuclear command and control systems and communication systems that enable the president to order nuclear weapons into use. It includes all of the computers that are used to plan nuclear operations, anything from a tanker that has to make an in-air rendezvous with a bomber so that it gets refueled. They have to get there at the same place at the same time, and that's complicated. They start from different locations and they fly at different speeds, and so on. So it's a very complicated task to get them to the same place at the same time. There's the planning that goes into nuclear operations. The nuclear war plans include, strike number, option number 47 includes a strike on this, that, and the other target, and you have to make sure that the warheads that land there don't interfere with each other, and they have to arrive at the right time, and so on and so forth. All those sorts of things. So it's all a big planning operation. There's a lot of pre-planning that goes into the setting up the nuclear war plans, and so on. And they all depend on computers. Okay, and then everywhere you have a computer, there's a potential for something going wrong. You and I were going to have a conversation this morning at noon. It was delayed by a couple of minutes because of some foul up. Because there was a technical glitch either on my end, on your end, rescheduling our meeting from yesterday to today. And I found that the link that I was supposed to use yesterday didn't work today. I mean, that's a stupid thing to have happened. It only interrupted us for a couple of minutes, but that's the kind of thing that, when computers are involved, that's the sort of thing that will go wrong. And so every place that you put a computer where there wasn't a computer before is a place for a potential cyber attack. And this is a very scary sort of thing where basically we can't go forward. I mean, information technology is thoroughly integrated into our lives, including in the military.
But what amazes me is that even though we have computers in our pockets and computers in our refrigerators, I think most Americans really don't think about nuclear weapons as being computerized. And so I don't think there's a high sensitivity or awareness of cyber attack dangers to the nuclear enterprise. Do you find that as yourself?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, this is something, part of the reason that we're talking is I sent you a paper that describes all of this stuff. And so, for example, computers are intimately involved in every aspect of the nuclear enterprise. So let me give you some examples on that. And I'm going to start sort of from at the beginning to the end, where the beginning is the weapons end of it, and the end is the end of the world. At the beginning end, so in terms of maintaining these nuclear weapons, you got to do simulations, for example, to make sure that you don't test nuclear weapons underground anymore. You test them in computers, and they are based on those tests are based on basically simulations of what do you think a nuclear weapon do? That depends on certain data and certain programs. Okay, there's a program database and a data database, the data collected from past nuclear weapons and so on. And you try to predict the behavior of a nuclear weapon that you manufactured 30 years ago and see if it still works. But you don't test the nuclear weapon, you simulate it, okay? And if there are problems with it, then you try to correct it. I mean, that's obviously a very computer-heavy enterprise. That's a ripe place for a cyber attack. Now, something that people will say was, well, that's simple to solve. Just don't connect it to the internet. Okay. And that helps. That's true. Something connected to the internet is probably more immune to a cyber attack than something that isn't. But it's a question of more immune, is more resistant or less resistant rather than immune or not immune. Because somebody has to update the program. That program lives on a network somewhere. Maybe that network isn't connected to the internet, but it may be possible to gain access to that network. Not 2011, 2010, something like that. The Buckshot Yankee was an incident that afflicted the classified networks of the Department of Defense. And what happened is not that it was connected to the internet in the usual sense of the term. There's an asterisk on that, which is irrelevant. But somebody plugged in a USB stick into a classified computer. It caused all kinds of trouble on the DoD classified network. DoD took 18 months to get it out. Then there are the delivery systems. Okay, the missiles. We put delivery system. We put nuclear weapons on missiles. So we're going to put them on the front end of a new ICBM, and we're going to put them on an F-35, which is the dual capable aircraft that we're going to deploy to the European theater, and we're going to put it on the front end of the long range standoff cruise missile. Which is also part of the plan. So all of these other systems, the F-35 and the ground-based strategic, the new ICBM and the LRSO, all those sorts of things, they're going to have computer difficulties. They're going to have computers built into them too. The F-35, and many people say it's more computer than airplane. It's got 10 million lines of program code in it, and does anybody understand what every line of those code does? The answer is no. Nobody can understand 10 million lines of code. No single person. Maybe collectively, you put 100 people in a room, maybe they understand it collectively, but that's a very different question. It's known that the F-35 is going to be, the Air Force has talked about it as being the quarterback of air operations, which means it's going to be sending and receiving lots of data to lots of other platforms. So what's to prevent an adversary of going into one of those platforms, getting into the F-35 via one of those? Now, is that going to be protected? Of course it's going to be protected, but maybe they can circumvent the protection. The long-range standoff cruise missile have the capability, for example, to be retargeted in flight. So you launch it at target X, and then maybe in the 5 hours that it takes to go there, you say, wait a minute, it's already launched, but I need to attack a higher priority target. So you send a message to it to go off and attack something else, and it's in range. Okay, well, that's a good thing. You'd want that for operational flexibility, but getting the message to it means that it's got to have an antenna somewhere, and it's got to pick up the signals. Maybe the bad guy can get in through through that antenna. Then we come to the nuclear command and control system, NC3. Okay, which one could argue is the biggest issue of all. This is the NC3 system or infrastructure is that which allows the President of the United States to direct the movement and use of nuclear forces, and it has many different aspects to it. So, for example, day to day, on a day-to-day basis, they have to worry about planning nuclear operations. So what are the cyber vulnerabilities in nuclear command and control system? Well, you can imagine two kinds of attacks. You can attack the always requirement, and you can attack the never requirement. Okay. So if you attack the always requirement, what you're saying is that the requirement is that they're always used when they are supposed to be used. Okay, when the proper order has been given. Okay, so you can imagine a cyber attack that comes in to compromise the delivery of a message to the nuclear forces that says, launch, and you're interfering, and a cyber attack interferes with that. And you can imagine a variety of ways where that theoretically could happen. If you're going to compromise the never part, you should never use it unless you should never use it if proper authorization has not been given. This is now can you spoof the can you pretend that you're the president and give a order to launch that's not properly authorized? Okay, so and you can imagine ways of doing that too by computer, because it's not that the president has to show up somewhere and say, you recognize me, go push. He's going to do this. This is all, he's in an airplane and there's something happening at the Pentagon and stuff like that. And so you have to use electronic means, procedural means to authenticate that this is really the president. So there are issues like that, and you can imagine ways of conducting a cyber attack that could affect the ability to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used without proper authorization. Okay, so those are the yeah.
No, I just wanted to ask you about one of those, which is a cyber attack that might lead to a false alarm. Of nuclear attack, and if you could give me your sense about how that might work and how possible that might be.
Well, okay, so here is an example of how how something might go. Okay, I start out with the proposition that nations that are nuclear armed really want to protect their nuclear weapons. Okay, and that they are very precious assets. And if somebody's trying to attack your nuclear assets, that's a really serious business. And you might be tempted under those circumstances to use them rather than lose them. Okay, so that's the fear. Okay, so here is a potential scenario. Okay, imagine a scenario in which the communications networks of we're in with the two nations are in conflict with each other, A and B. A's communications networks are being used to prosecute attacks against B. B says, I don't like that. I don't like the fact that A's communications networks make their attacks on me more effective. I'm going to attack them. So B starts attacking A's communication networks. Perfectly reasonable sort of thing. You'd expect that you'd expect them to do that, you'd expect them to do that in the middle of a battle. Okay. But let's pretend for a moment that A's communications networks are dual capable. That is, they are used both for controlling nuclear operations and for conventional operations. Of course, right until this point, they've only been used for conventional operations, but they have some utility for doing nuclear communications. What does A see? What is A seeing now? Now A is seeing that B is attacking his communications networks. B says, and they're having some effect. Okay. What A is saying is, wait a minute, my communications networks are being degraded. Okay, because of this attack from B. But that's also degrading my nuclear capability. How do I know that he's going after only my conventional capability? So he starts worrying that he's starting to go after my nuclear capability. Now I start to get worried, more worried than I would otherwise. If the systems were completely separate, if there was a nuclear and a conventional, this would be much less of an issue. Okay. But all of the trends in technology are to combine the two. I mean, for one thing, it's cheaper. It's much cheaper. Same hardware, same people, same training, and so on. It's much cheaper to do that. So nations have lots of operational and efficiency considerations to attend to when they integrate cyber and conventional nuclear communications capabilities. But they risk ambiguities that they wouldn't otherwise have. And that's the sort of thing that could lead to increased pressures on nuclear use.
So this is the problem of entanglement that you're talking about.
That's right. That's correct.
Of mixing nuclear and conventional communications.
That's correct. And, you could also imagine, communications was, a dummy variable there. It could have been early warning. So, for example, the early warning satellites, which are designed to provide information that detects a strategic missile launch, turns out that it can also detect launches of shorter range missiles. Okay. So, if using that information makes it more effective, makes defenses against tactical, non-strategic ballistic missiles more effective, the guy firing those missiles might be tempted to say, hey, wait a minute, how come our missiles are getting shot down? Okay. Oh, it's those early warning satellites that are up there. Let's go after them. Okay. And now you go after them, you're not just disabling the tactical ballistic missile warning, you're disabling the strategic ballistic missile warning stuff. And the guy who owns those satellites up there says, hey, wait a minute, he's starting to take out my strategic nuclear stuff. Okay. What's he planning to do? And so you can easily see how that can go south pretty quickly. Okay. And of course, a message over the hotline that says, from A to B, that says, we're attacking yes, it's true, we're attacking your early warning satellites, but it's only because we want to compromise the effectiveness of the tactical ballistic defenses that you have. Somehow you can't imagine B, saying, well, okay, that's fine.
Let's turn for a moment, if we can, to potential solutions to this. And you have written that cyber defenses themselves may not be enough to deal with the risks here, and that we might have to make some changes to nuclear policy itself. And you have written about the inherent risks of launch on warning and our land-based ballistic missiles. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the issue here is that there could be a glitch or an attack that might somehow foul up your early warning systems of a missile. I just gave you a scenario, okay, in which the early warning systems could potentially be compromised. Well, okay, maybe it's not a question of just compromise. Maybe the side effect of a cyber attack might be that it trips an alarm or causes some glitch to appear in somebody's early warning system. Okay. And now the guy on the receiving end, let's say it's the United States, sees a false warning of strategic missile attack, and let's say that it indicates an attack on the ICBMs, on fixed silo-based ICBMs. The U.S. This could be a false alarm. There have been false alarms in the past because of glitches in the early warning system. There's no reason that those glitches could not. There's no reason that those glitches couldn't be occurring because of a cyber attack. Now, they wouldn't do it deliberately. Nobody's going to create. The bad guy isn't going to try to create a false warning of a strategic missile attack on the United States, right? That's not in their interest to do so because we might do something rash, okay? But this could be a glitch. It's a side effect of some other mucking around in deliberate mucking around in our early warning system, okay? So there's a glitch that appears, and we don't know it's a glitch, and we say, "Damn, we only have 10 minutes to decide whether or not to launch our ICBMs." Then you say, well, is this real? Well, in 10 minutes, you don't debug a glitch. You don't debug a signal. You have to assume that it's correct. It just boggles the mind to think that anybody could determine that it was a false alarm if it's something that's been induced by a cyber attack. You just don't know. Hard to do. So, and if you get it wrong, you either lose your ICBMs or you start World War III. Okay, so the high stakes. And so your question then is, what should I do? And one option to do that is to get rid of the scenario in which you have to do launch on warning, or in fact on any other time critical. If it's time critical. Okay, but the ICBM launch on warning is the most stressing case because you have a very limited timeline for that, and you really have to use or lose those assets. Okay, so maybe the right thing to do is to get rid of the fixed ICBM, land-based ICBMs. Okay, now I underscore fixed. Okay, there are many solutions to this problem. One is you could just abandon them, say to hell with it, and not do the ground-based strategic deterrent. Okay, that's one possibility. Okay, there are other possibilities too. Different basing modes for ICBMs could do it. You could put, and a variety of them have been explored, where you could maintain much more robust communication with them than you can maintain with the submarines, and so on. I mean, there are a whole variety of things that have been proposed over the years that you could imagine doing. But the point is that you want to get rid of launch on warning because that's the only scenario in which your time windows for making decisions are so compressed. And maybe you're contemplating going to war because of a cyber attack that's somehow gone wrong. You don't know. I mean, the fate of the world is at stake there.
Very true. Very true. Last question for you. As cyber threats proliferate, one could imagine a president and a government losing confidence in its own ability to launch nuclear weapons, and thus lose confidence in deterrence itself. How do we avoid that?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. I'm going to give you an answer I'm going to give you a layered answer on it. The first cut at that is that with the scenario that you just described, that people lose confidence because of potential cyber glitches and so on, one could argue that it's unlikely to happen because people at the top are so clueless about the nature of cyber that they will just accept the word of their subordinates that everything's fine. Okay, and in fact, when everything's not fine, we have a lot of they would have a lot. They would be overly confident, and they would just act accordingly. They would act in this overly confident manner. And so, and you talked about losing confidence. No, they would just ignore it because they're used to ignoring information about cyber. Now, that's a terrible answer to your question.
but possible, very possible.
But possible, right? But it's a terrible answer to your question. My answer to that is that you might want to seriously consider the possibility that you have a completely separate system a real emergency, minimum essential communications network, which, if you remember the doctrine from the 60s and 70s and 80s, there was that. We had a minimum essential emergency communications network. Part of that were some Minutemen IIs that had the emergency rocket communication system, which we could launch, and then they would broadcast the appropriate emergency action message, and you would launch them on warning, and so on and so on and so forth. Okay, and the whole business would be, you could at least guarantee some communications to the forces to ensure retaliation. I'd say that you want to have another network like that now. Whether it should be secret or not, we can argue about that. Whether you want the world's bad guys to know that we have that, you can argue about that. I'd say we do want them to know about it, but the idea is you want to make it completely separate. It's a completely standalone system, so that you always have confidence. So that's the way I would go. But in real time, I don't know how to answer your question.
Fair enough. No, I appreciate your effort, and I would love to keep talking about this fascinating subject, but unfortunately, our time is up.
Okay.
Our guest today has been a pleasure. Herb Lin, Senior Research Scholar for Cyber Policy and Security at Stanford University. Herb, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for letting me have some airtime. Thank you.
And to our listeners, please stay well.
Letters, we get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
And now, everyone's favorite nuclear Q&A segment. Tom, are you ready for this?
Bring it on, Michelle.
Joel from North Carolina asks, is there someone further up the chain of military command that could stop a launch command just in case? And would they do it?
Joel, thanks for your great and timely question. A lot of people ask that, can't the military just stop this? Can't the military step in and stop a presidential order to launch nuclear weapons? And I understand why people ask this, because they really want reassurance that the madman in the White House isn't going to end the world. So I understand the motivation. Unfortunately, I cannot be very reassuring. Whether the military would agree or not to a launch order is a gray area. I personally feel that under most situations they would. There may be a few situations where they might not. But we can't count on that. I mean, the stakes here, the fate of the world, are just too high to put hope as our solution. We can't just hope that the military will see through what the president is doing and stop a launch. And frankly, it's unfair to the military to put a policy issue like this on them. We as a nation, as Congress, and as a new administration, the Biden administration, need to decide what we want to tell the military in terms of how we want to use our nuclear weapons. And so clearly, in my view and in Plowshare's view, we need to give much clearer direction to the military about when it is appropriate for a president to use nuclear weapons. And so the things I would say about that are, there's two scenarios that we worry about. One is the current scenario. There's a madman in the White House with his finger on the button, and this cannot stand. We must change this policy. The other scenario is a false alarm situation where we simply don't want a president making a decision too quickly based on bad information. And a solution, there are a number of solutions have been proposed. The two I would talk to right now is one, there's legislation in Congress that has been supported by Senator Warren and Representative Adam Smith in the House that would enact a no first use policy. Such a policy would be really comforting right now, because if we had it in place, the president would not be able to launch nuclear weapons unless we had been attacked already by another country. And that hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. So Trump would be prohibited from launching. So having a no first use policy that really prohibits first use, also prohibits any possible preemptive use or using nuclear weapons on warning of attack, would really be a great solution in this case. And it would also help address the false alarm problem, that we might have a president that would see an incoming attack, respond too quickly to it by launching our weapons before that attack is determined to be real, turns out to be a false alarm, and we've just started out nuclear war by mistake. Again, if we had a no first use policy that said we cannot launch until we've been attacked in a confirmed way, then the president would not be able to do that. The other approach I would just mention is an approach sponsored by Senator Markey and Ted Lieu in the House that would require congressional approval for any first use of nuclear weapons. This would also give us, room to be more comfortable in the current situation. If we had this legislation as law, President Trump would have to get approval from Congress before launching nuclear weapons. And that would certainly make me feel more comfortable right now. So unfortunately, Joel, I can't give you any reassurances. Yes, the military could stop certain orders, but that isn't good enough. We need to have much stricter guidelines and guardrails around nuclear policy. And I'm hoping that the new Congress and the new administration, the Biden administration, will step up and enact some of these policies and make the world safer for us and future generations.
Another week, another question. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Joel. And remember, if you would like to get your question on the air, tweet or DM us at PressButtonPod or send us an email at pressthebutton@plowshares.org.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.